Imagine being invited somewhere not to be honored, not to be celebrated, but to be humiliated in front of everyone who matters. That was exactly what Victoria Bradford had planned for Grace Williams. Grace worked as a cleaning lady at the Bradford Tower in downtown Chicago. Every night, she mopped the marble floors, emptied trash bins in executive offices, and polished the glass walls until they sparkled under the city lights. Most people walked past her without a second glance. To them, she was invisible, just another face in a uniform pushing a cart full of supplies. But Victoria Bradford noticed her, and not in a good way. Victoria was the wife of Daniel Bradford, CEO of Bradford Enterprises, one of the most powerful real estate companies in the Midwest. She was beautiful, rich, and cruel in ways that only bored wealthy women could be. One afternoon, while visiting her husband's office, Victoria watched Grace cleaning the hallway outside Daniel's door. Something about the way Grace carried herself, quiet but dignified, irritated Victoria. So she came up with a twisted idea. She would invite Grace to the annual Bradford Foundation Charity Gala, a black-tie event attended by millionaires, politicians, and celebrities. But the invitation was not an act of kindness. It was a setup. Victoria wanted to watch Grace fumble, embarrass herself, and become the laughingstock of Chicago's elite. She wanted to remind everyone, including Grace, where people like her belonged. But what Victoria did not know was that Grace Williams carried secrets. Secrets that would shatter everything Victoria thought she knew. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Now let's begin this story. Victoria Bradford stood in front of her full-length mirror, adjusting the diamond necklace that rested perfectly against her collarbone. Her reflection was flawless. The emerald green gown hugged her body in all the right places. Her skin glowed from the spa treatment she had that morning, and her blonde hair was styled in soft waves that framed her sharp, beautiful face. Tonight was the night. The annual Bradford Foundation Charity Gala was the most exclusive event in Chicago, and Victoria had spent months planning every detail. The guest list included governors, famous actors, top businessmen, and old money families who had been running the city for generations. It was her stage, her moment to shine as the perfect wife of a powerful CEO. But this year, Victoria had added something special to the evening, something that would make the night unforgettable. She smiled at herself in the mirror, a cold, satisfied smile. Downstairs, she could hear the staff preparing the mansion for the after-party that would follow the main gala at the Four Seasons Hotel. Caterers moved quickly through the kitchen. Florists arranged white roses in crystal vases, and her assistant checked the seating chart for the third time. Everything had to be perfect. Victoria picked up her phone and scrolled to the message she had sent 2 weeks ago. It was simple, almost sweet. Grace Williams, you are cordially invited to the Bradford Foundation Charity Gala as a guest of honor. We would be delighted to have you join us for an evening of elegance and giving back to the community. She had hand-delivered the invitation herself, walking into the janitorial closet on the 15th floor where Grace kept her supplies. Grace had looked up surprised, her dark eyes cautious. Victoria remembered the moment clearly. She had smiled warmly, placing the thick cream-colored envelope into Grace's rough, work-worn hands. Grace had stared at the invitation like it was a mistake. "Mrs. Bradford, I think you got the wrong person," she had said softly, her voice steady but confused. Victoria had laughed lightly, touching Grace's shoulder in a gesture that was meant to seem kind. "No, Grace. I chose you specifically. You work so hard, and I think it's time someone like you gets to see how the other half lives. Consider it a thank you for all you do." Grace had hesitated, turning the envelope over in her hands. "I don't have anything to wear to something like this," she admitted. Victoria's smile had widened. "Don't worry about that. Just come as you are. We're all equals at this event. It's about heart, not appearance." That had been the trap. Victoria knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Grace would show up in something simple, maybe even cheap. She knew the other guests would notice. She knew the whispers would start the moment Grace walked through the door. and she would be there, front and center, pretending to be kind while watching Grace crumble under the weight of humiliation. It was perfect. Victoria placed her phone down and picked up her clutch, checking her lipstick one last time. Her husband, Daniel, appeared in the doorway, looking sharp in his black tuxedo. He was a tall man with graying hair and a strong jawline, the kind of man who commanded a room without saying a word. "You ready?" he asked, smiling at her. Victoria turned and walked toward him, looping her arm through his. "More than ready," she said. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable." The Four Seasons ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft golden light over the room. Round tables dressed in white linen surrounded a stage where a jazz band played smooth, elegant music. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, moving between clusters of guests who laughed and talked in low, polished voices. The women wore gowns that cost more than most people's rent, and the men wore watches that could pay off a car. This was wealth. This was power. And Victoria Bradford was at the center of it all. She moved through the crowd with ease, greeting senators and socialites, kissing cheeks and complimenting dresses she secretly hated. Everyone knew her. Everyone wanted to be near her. But her mind was somewhere else. She kept glancing toward the entrance, waiting. Her best friend, Melissa Harrington, leaned in close, holding a glass of champagne. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, her tone curious. Victoria smiled slyly. "You'll see. I did something fun tonight." Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Fun? What kind of fun?" Before Victoria could answer, there was a shift in the room. The conversations near the entrance grew quieter. Heads started to turn. Victoria's heart raced with excitement. She turned toward the door, expecting to see exactly what she had imagined. Grace Williams, awkward and out of place, standing in the doorway like a lost child. But what she saw instead made her breath catch in her throat. Grace Williams stood at the entrance, and she was stunning. She wore a floor-length midnight blue gown that fit her like it had been made just for her. The fabric shimmered under the lights, elegant and timeless. Her hair, usually pulled back in a simple bun, was styled in soft curls that framed her face. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, highlighting her high cheekbones and deep brown eyes. But it was not just the way she looked. It was the way she carried herself. Grace walked into that ballroom like she owned it. Her posture was straight, her chin high, her expression calm and composed. There was no nervousness, no hesitation. She moved through the crowd with a quiet authority that made people step aside. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is that?" "She's gorgeous." "I've never seen her before." Victoria's smile disappeared. Her hands tightened around her champagne glass. This was not supposed to happen. Melissa leaned in again, her eyes wide. "Victoria, who is that woman?" Victoria's voice was tight, barely controlled. "That," she said slowly, "is my husband's cleaning lady." Melissa's jaw dropped. "What?" But before Victoria could say anything else, Grace's eyes found hers across the room, and for just a moment, Grace smiled. It was a small, knowing smile. A smile that said, "You have no idea who I am." And that was when Victoria realized she had made a terrible mistake. What secret was Grace hiding? And how would it destroy everything Victoria had built? Stay tuned for next chapter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Victoria's mind was racing. She watched Grace move through the ballroom like she belonged there, like she had attended events like this 100 times before. People were actually turning to look at her. Men nodded respectfully as she passed. Women smiled, curious and impressed. This was not the plan. This was the opposite of the plan. Victoria had expected Grace to show up in something simple, maybe a plain dress from a department store, her hair pulled back the way it always was at work, her eyes nervous and unsure. She had imagined Grace standing by the wall, holding a plate of food, trying to disappear into the background while Victoria and her friends exchanged amused glances. She had imagined the whispers, the subtle mockery, the way people would smile politely to Grace's face and then laugh about it the moment she walked away. That was supposed to be the joke. That was supposed to be the entertainment. But now, looking at Grace, Victoria felt something she had not expected. Fear. Grace was not just beautiful. She was confident, and confidence in a place like this was power. Victoria's husband, Daniel, had been talking to a group of investors near the bar, but even he had stopped mid-sentence to look at Grace. His expression was unreadable, but Victoria saw the way his eyes followed her across the room. That made Victoria's stomach turn. Melissa grabbed her arm, pulling her aside near one of the tall floral arrangements. "Victoria, what is going on? You invited your cleaning lady to this event." Melissa's voice was low but sharp, her eyes wide with disbelief. Victoria forced a smile, trying to regain control of the situation. "It was supposed to be funny," she said, her voice tight. "I thought it would be entertaining. You know, like those makeover shows where they take someone ordinary and put them in a place they don't belong. I wanted to see her squirm." Melissa stared at her, her mouth slightly open, but she's not squirming. She looks like she could be on the cover of Vogue. Where did she even get that dress? Victoria had no answer. She did not know, and that was the problem. Grace was supposed to be predictable. She was supposed to be small, quiet, and easy to control. But the woman walking through that ballroom was none of those things. Melissa shook her head slowly. "This is bad, Victoria. If people find out you invited her as some kind of joke, you're going to look like a monster. And if they don't know, they're going to think she's someone important. Either way, you lose." Victoria's jaw tightened. She hated that Melissa was right. She downed the rest of her champagne and handed the glass to a passing waiter. "I need to fix this," she muttered. "How?" Melissa asked, but Victoria did not answer. She was already moving, weaving to the crowd toward Grace. She plastered on her brightest smile, the one she used for cameras and donors, and approached Grace with open arms. "Grace," Victoria said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look absolutely lovely." Grace turned to face her, and up close, Victoria could see just how composed she really was. There was no panic in her eyes, no discomfort, just calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Bradford," Grace said smoothly. Her voice was clear and polished, not the quiet, hesitant tone Victoria was used to hearing in the hallways of Bradford Tower. "It was very kind of you to invite me." Victoria's smile felt like it was cracking at the edges. "Of course. We believe in recognizing all the people who make our company run. You work so hard, and I thought it was time you experienced something special." A few people nearby were listening now, nodding in approval. One woman, a board member's wife, even placed a hand over her heart. "That is so thoughtful, Victoria. Not many people remember the little guys." Victoria wanted to scream. This was not going the way she planned. Grace smiled softly. "I really do appreciate it, Mrs. Bradford. It's not every day someone like me gets invited to something like this." There it was, the opening. Victoria's mind raced. She could still turn this around. She could still make Grace look small. "Well," Victoria said, her tone dripping with false warmth, "I know events like this can be intimidating. If you need anything, or if you feel out of place, just let me know. I'm happy to help." It was subtle, but it was there. The implication. The reminder that Grace did not belong. But Grace did not flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her smile never fading. "I appreciate that, but I'll be fine. I've been to events like this before." Victoria blinked. "You have?" Grace nodded. "Yes, many times, actually, though it's been a while." Before Victoria could respond, a voice cut through the tension. Grace Williams. Victoria turned to see a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit walking toward them. She recognized him immediately. Senator Richard Coleman, one of the most powerful politicians in Illinois. He was smiling, his hand already extended toward Grace. Grace's face lit up, and for the first time that night, Victoria saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Senator Coleman," Grace said, taking his hand. "It's been too long." The senator laughed, shaking her hand firmly. "Too long indeed. I didn't know you were back in Chicago. How have you been?" Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Back in Chicago? What did that mean? Grace and the senator spoke easily, like old friends. He asked about her health, mentioned someone named Margaret, and even made a joke that made Grace laugh, a real, genuine laugh that made the people around them smile. Victoria stood frozen, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she was seeing. Who was Grace Williams? The senator finally turned to Victoria, still smiling. "Mrs. Bradford, I see you met one of the finest women I know. Grace and I worked together years ago on several community initiatives. She's a remarkable person." Victoria's mouth felt dry. I didn't know that." Senator Coleman nodded. "Grace is too humble. She doesn't talk about her past much. But trust me, if she's working for your company, you're lucky to have her." And with that, he excused himself, promising to catch up with Grace later in the evening. The moment he walked away, Victoria felt the weight of a dozen eyes on her. People were looking at Grace with new interest now. Whispers started again, but this time they were different. "She knows Senator Coleman? Who is she? She must be someone important." Victoria's hands were trembling. She turned to Grace, her voice low and sharp. "Who are you?" Grace met her eyes, and for the first time that night, Victoria saw something cold in them, something that made her stomach drop. "I'm exactly who you thought I was, Mrs. Bradford," Grace said quietly. "A woman who cleans floors. But I'm also someone you should never have underestimated." And then, without another word, Grace turned and walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, her perfect evening crumbling around her. Across the room, Daniel Bradford watched his wife, his expression thoughtful, and next to him, his assistant whispered something in his ear that made his face go pale. What did the assistant say? And what else was Grace hiding? Find out in next chapter. If you're loving this story, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. See you in the next chapter. Daniel Bradford stood near the bar, his whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips. His assistant, Marcus Chun, a sharp young man who handled Daniel's most sensitive business matters, had just finished whispering something in his ear. And whatever Marcus had said made Daniel's face lose all its color. Marcus stepped back, his tablet in hand, his expression serious. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded. "I just confirmed it. Her full name is Grace Eleanor Williams. She's the widow of Jonathan Williams, founder of Williams and Associates. They were one of the biggest architectural firms in the Midwest before he died. She owned 40% of the company. When he passed, she sold her shares for $23 million. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. $23 million. The cleaning lady who mopped his office floors every night was worth more than most of the people in this room. Marcus continued, his voice low and careful. After her husband died, she disappeared from the public eye. No one knew where she went. Some people assumed she moved out of the country. But apparently, she's been right here in Chicago the whole time, working as a janitor. Daniel's mind was spinning. He thought back to all the times he had walked past Grace in the hallway, barely acknowledging her presence. He remembered seeing her empty his trash, wipe down his desk, and clean the windows in his office while he was on conference calls. He had never looked at her. Not really. None of them had. Marcus glanced across the room toward Grace, who was now talking to a group of women near the dessert table. They were laughing at something she said, leaning in like she was the most interesting person they had met all night. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "does your wife know who Grace Williams is?" Daniel shook his head slowly, still staring at Grace. "No, Victoria has no idea." Marcus hesitated, then added, Mrs. Bradford was the one who invited her tonight. I heard her telling someone earlier that she thought it would be funny to bring the cleaning lady to the gala. She wanted to humiliate her. Daniel closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Of course she did. That was exactly the kind of thing Victoria would do. She had always been cruel in small ways, the kind of cruelty that rich, bored women inflicted on people they thought were beneath them. But this time she had made a mistake. A big one. Does anyone else know? Daniel asked. Marcus shook his head. Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. Senator Coleman clearly recognized her. And once people start asking questions, the truth is going to come out. When it does, and people realize your wife invited a wealthy widow to this event as some kind of joke, it's going to be a PR nightmare. Daniel drained the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. He needed to think. He needed to control the situation before it exploded in his face. Across the room, Victoria was standing near the stage, talking to the event coordinator, but her eyes kept darting toward Grace. She looked rattled, and Daniel knew why. Victoria had built her entire identity on being the queen of Chicago's social scene. She thrived on control, on being the one everyone admired and envied. But tonight, someone had walked into her kingdom and stolen her spotlight, without even trying. Victoria excused herself from the coordinator and made her way toward Daniel, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. When she reached him, she grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "We need to talk," she hissed. Daniel looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Not here." "Yes, here," Victoria snapped, pulling him toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the city. Once they were out of earshot, she turned on him, her eyes blazing. "Did you know?" she demanded. "Did you know who she was?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Did I know who?" "Grace Williams." Victoria's voice was sharp, almost frantic. "Did you know she wasn't just some random cleaning lady? Senator Coleman knows her. He acted like they were old friends. And people are asking questions. Daniel, they want to know who she is, and I don't have answers." Daniel studied his wife for a moment, seeing the cracks in her perfectly polished exterior. For the first time in years, Victoria looked vulnerable, scared even. He could tell her the truth right now. He could explain exactly who Grace Williams was and watch Victoria's world collapse in real time. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the years of watching Victoria treat people like toys. Or maybe it was the quiet dignity he had seen in Grace's eyes when she walked into this ballroom. The kind of dignity his wife would never understand. So instead, Daniel shrugged. "I have no idea who she is, Victoria. You're the one who invited her." Victoria's face went red. "I invited her because I thought she was nobody. I thought it would be funny to see her out of her element. But now she's walking around like she owns the place, and everyone is treating her like she's royalty. This is a disaster, Daniel. A disaster." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe you shouldn't have invited someone to humiliate them in the first place." Victoria's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daniel said coldly. "You invited that woman here to make fun of her. You wanted to watch her suffer. And now you're upset because she's not playing along with your little game." Victoria's eyes filled with angry tears. "How dare you? I did this for us. I wanted to remind everyone in this room who we are, what we've built. And now that woman is making me look like a fool." Daniel leaned in close, his voice low and hard. "No, Victoria. You made yourself look like a fool. And if you don't fix this, you're going to make both of us look even worse." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone by the window, her hands shaking with rage. Back in the ballroom, Grace was talking to a woman named Helen Cartwright, the wife of a federal judge. Helen was one of the most respected women in Chicago, known for her charity work and her no-nonsense personality. "You must tell me," Helen said, smiling warmly at Grace, "how did you end up working at Bradford Tower? I would have thought someone with your background would be doing something else." Grace's smile was soft but sad. After my husband died, I needed something to do with my hands. Something that kept me moving. Cleaning gave me that. It kept me grounded. And honestly, it taught me more about people than I ever learned in boardrooms. Helen nodded thoughtfully. That's very wise. Most people run from grief. You walk straight into it. I didn't have a choice, Grace said quietly, but I'm glad I did. It made me see the world differently. It made me see people differently. Helen placed a hand on Grace's arm. Well, I'm glad you're here tonight, and I hope we see more of you. As Helen walked away, Grace felt the weight of eyes on her again. She turned and saw Victoria standing across the room, staring at her with an expression that was equal parts hatred and fear. Grace held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. She had not come here for revenge. She had not come here to embarrass Victoria or expose her cruelty. She had come because the invitation had arrived at a time when she was ready to step back into the world. But now, standing in this ballroom surrounded by people who had no idea who she really was, Grace realized something. Victoria Bradford had opened a door she could not close, and what lay on the other side was going to change everything. Suddenly, the lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage. The MC, a well-known local news anchor, stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Before we continue, we have a very special announcement. Victoria's heart sank. What now? The MC smiled. Tonight, we are honored to have a surprise guest. Someone who has done extraordinary work in our community and who we are thrilled to welcome back into the public eye. Please join me in welcoming Grace Eleanor Williams to the stage. The room erupted in applause. Grace's eyes widened in shock. She had not expected this. Victoria felt like she was going to be sick. What was Grace about to say? And how much worse could this night possibly get? Don't miss Chapter 4. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Grace stood frozen for a moment, the applause washing over her like a wave. She had not prepared for this. She had not expected to be recognized, let alone called to the stage in front of hundreds of people. But as the spotlight found in the crowd, she felt something shift inside her chest. It had been 5 years since she stood in front of people like this. 5 years since she had been Grace Eleanor Williams, philanthropist and businesswoman. 5 years since she had been someone who mattered. The applause grew louder and people stepped aside, creating a path to the stage. Grace took a breath, smoothed down her gown, and began walking. Every step felt like she was shedding a layer of the invisibility she had wrapped herself in for so long. She could feel eyes on her, curious and respectful. She could hear whispers of recognition from the older guests who remember her name, her face, her work. When she reached the stage, the MC, a woman named Andrea Cole, greeted her with a warm smile and a handshake. Andrea was a respected journalist who had interviewed Grace years ago for a profile on successful black women in business. Grace Williams, Andrea said into the microphone, her voice filled with genuine warmth. It is so wonderful to see you again. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who may not know, Grace is a former business leader and philanthropist who has contributed millions to education and housing initiatives right here in Chicago. After the passing of her husband, she stepped away from public life. But tonight, we are honored that she has joined us. The applause swelled again. Grace stood at the microphone, her hands folded in front of her, and looked out at the crowd. And then her eyes found Victoria. Victoria was standing near the back of the room now, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked like someone who had just realized they were standing on the edge of a cliff. Grace allowed herself a small, sad smile. She had not planned to speak tonight. But now that she was here, she realized she had something to say. "Thank you, Andrea," Grace began, her voice steady and clear. "I did not expect to be up here tonight, but I appreciate the warm welcome. It has been a long time since I've stood in a room like this. A long time since I've been around people who remember my name. She paused, letting her words settle over crowd. 5 years ago, I lost my husband, Jonathan. He was my partner in every sense of the word. We built a life together, a business together, and a legacy together. When he died, I felt like I lost myself too. I didn't know who I was without him. So I did something that most people thought was crazy. I walked away from everything. I sold my shares in our company, donated most of the money, and I disappeared. The room was silent now, everyone hanging on her words. Victoria felt her stomach twist into knots. Grace continued, her voice soft but powerful. I took a job as a cleaning lady because I needed to do something with my hands. I needed to feel useful again. And in that work, I found something I had lost. I found humility. I found peace. I found clarity. When you clean, you see things that other people don't see. You see how people treat those they think are beneath them. You see who has kindness in their heart and who only pretends. Grace's eyes scanned the room, landing on several faces, including Daniel Bradford's. He was watching her intently, his expression unreadable. I worked at Bradford Tower for 2 years, Grace said, and in that time, I learned more about human nature than I ever did in boardrooms and charity galas. I saw people walk past me like I was invisible. I heard conversations that people assumed I wasn't smart enough to understand. I saw kindness from unexpected places and cruelty from people who smile for cameras. Victoria's hands were shaking. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her feet were glued to the floor. Grace's voice softened even more. Tonight, I was invited here by someone who thought I would be out of place. Someone who thought it would be entertaining to watch me stumble and feel small. But what that person didn't understand is that I have never felt small. Not when I was scrubbing floors. Not when I was emptying trash. And certainly not now. The crowd murmured, confused. Some people glanced around, trying to figure out who Grace was talking about. Andrea, the MC, looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Grace took a breath and continued. I'm not saying this to embarrass anyone. I'm saying this because I want people to understand something important. Your value is not determined by your job title. Your worth is not measured by the size of your bank account or the label on your dress. It is measured by how you treat people when you think no one is watching. It is measured by the kindness you give to people who can do nothing for you in return. The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and nodding in agreement. Senator Coleman was on his feet, smiling proudly. Helen Cartwright wiped a tear from her eye. Even some of the younger guests, who had no idea who Grace was before tonight, were moved by her words. But Victoria was not clapping. She stood still, her face burning with humiliation. People around her were starting to look at her now, whispering behind their hands. Melissa leaned in close. Victoria, did you invite her here as a joke? Victoria couldn't speak. Her throat was tight, her chest heavy. She felt like the walls were closing in on her. On stage, Grace wrapped up her speech. I want to thank everyone here for the work you do to support this foundation. Your generosity changes lives. And I want to thank Mrs. Bradford for inviting me tonight. Whether she meant it as an act of kindness or not, it gave me the courage to step back into a world I thought I had lost forever. So thank you. Grace stepped away from the microphone to thunderous applause. Andrea hugged her before she descended the stairs, and several people rushed forward to greet her, shaking her hand and congratulating her. Victoria watched it all from the back of the room, feeling smaller and smaller with every passing second. Daniel appeared beside her, his expression hard. We're leaving, he said quietly. Now. Victoria nodded numbly and followed him toward the exit. But before they reached the door, a voice stopped them. Mr. and Mrs. Bradford. They turned to see Senator Coleman walking toward them, his expression polite but firm. Senator, Daniel said, forcing a smile. Wonderful event, isn't it? The senator nodded. It is. I just wanted to say, Mrs. Bradford, that it was very thoughtful of you to invite Grace tonight. I know she appreciated it." His words were kind, but there was something in his eyes that made Victoria's skin crawl. He knew exactly what she had done, and he was letting her know that he knew. Victoria swallowed hard and managed a weak smile. "Of course. I'm glad she could make it." The senator nodded slowly, then turned and walked back toward the crowd. Daniel grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her toward the exit. They stepped outside into the cool Chicago night, the sounds of the gala fading behind them. Victoria's hands were trembling, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "This is a nightmare," she whispered. "This is an absolute nightmare." Daniel said nothing. He simply stood there, staring at the city lights, his jaw tight. Inside the ballroom, Grace stood surrounded by old friends and new admirers, feeling lighter than she had in years. She had not come here for revenge, but somehow justice had found her anyway, and the night was far from over. What would Victoria do next? And what other secrets were about to come to light? Find out in next chapter. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you think is going to happen next. Victoria sat in the back of the town car, her hands gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Daniel sat beside her, staring out the window in complete silence. The driver navigated through downtown Chicago, passing glowing storefronts and late-night crowds, but Victoria saw none of it. All she could see was Grace Williams standing on that stage, calm and powerful, while hundreds of people applauded her. All she could hear were Grace's words, cutting through the air like a knife. "Someone who thought I would be out of place. Someone who thought it would be entertaining to watch me stumble and feel small." Victoria's stomach turned. Grace had not said her name, but she didn't have to. People would figure it out. They would ask questions. They would remember that Victoria was the one who brought Grace to the gala. And when they did, Victoria's reputation, everything she had built, would crumble. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She looked down and saw a text from Melissa. "Call me. Now." Victoria ignored it. She couldn't deal with Melissa right now. She couldn't deal with anyone. Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice low and cold. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Victoria turned to him, her eyes flashing with anger. "What I've done? I didn't know who she was, Daniel. How was I supposed to know she was some rich widow playing dress-up as a janitor?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not the point, Victoria. The point is that you invited someone to a charity event with the intention of humiliating them. You thought it would be funny. You thought you could treat another human being like a joke." Victoria's face flushed. "Don't you dare lecture me. You walked past her every single day, and you never even looked at her. None of you did. So don't act like you're better than me." Daniel turned to face her fully now, his eyes hard. "You're right. I didn't look at her. I didn't see her. And that's on me. But I didn't invite her to a public event to mock her. I didn't set her up to fail in front of hundreds of people. That was all you." Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I didn't set her up to fail. She wasn't supposed to look like that. She wasn't supposed to be confident. She wasn't supposed to know Senator Coleman, or give some inspiring speech that made everyone love her. She was supposed to be nobody." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and raw. Daniel shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "You really don't get it, do you? She was never nobody. You just treated her like she was. And now the whole city is going to know what kind of person you really are." Victoria's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from her mother. She declined it. Then another text came through, this time from someone she didn't recognize. She opened it and felt her blood run cold. It was a link to a social media post. Someone had recorded Grace's speech and uploaded it. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Victoria scrolled through them, her heart sinking with every word. Who invited her as a joke? That's disgusting. I heard it was the CEO's wife. Somebody needs to check her. Imagine being so insecure you have to humiliate a cleaning lady. Pathetic. Victoria dropped her phone like it had burned her. This was worse than she thought. This was so much worse. Daniel glanced at her phone, saw the video, and let out a long breath. "It's already going viral," he said quietly. "By tomorrow morning, everyone in Chicago is going to know what you did." Victoria felt panic rising in her chest. "We can fix this. We can put out a statement. We can say it was all a misunderstanding. We can't do anything," Daniel interrupted. "You did this, Victoria, and now you have to live with it." The car pulled up to their mansion in Lincoln Park, a massive 3-story home with a perfectly manicured lawn and a fountain in the front driveway. Victoria had always loved this house. It was a symbol of everything she had achieved, everything she had become. But tonight, it felt like a prison. She climbed out of the car without waiting for Daniel and walked quickly to the front door, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. The staff had gone home hours ago. Victoria kicked off her heels and headed straight for the bar in the living room, pouring herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. Daniel came in behind her, loosening his tie. "Drinking isn't going to fix this," he said. Victoria downed half the glass in one gulp. "I don't care." Daniel watched her for a moment, then sighed. "I'm going to bed. We'll deal with this in the morning." But Victoria didn't move. She stood there in the dark, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the bar. She barely recognized herself. The next morning, Victoria woke up to the sound of her phone ringing nonstop. She had fallen asleep on the couch, still in her gown, the wine glass tipped over on the floor beside her. Her head was pounding, and her mouth tasted like regret. She grabbed her phone and saw dozens of missed calls and messages. Her mother, her friends, board members from the foundation, even journalists. She opened her email and felt her stomach drop. The subject lines were brutal. "Request for comment, Bradford Foundation Gala controversy. Interview request, allegations of bullying at charity event. Urgent, donor concerns regarding Mrs. Bradford's conduct." Victoria scrolled through message after message, each one worse than the last. People were pulling their donations. Board members were calling for her resignation. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and messages. She opened Instagram and saw that she had lost thousands of followers overnight. Worse, someone had dug up old photos of her at other charity events, standing next to people she had likely ignored or dismissed, and was posting it with captions like, "How many other people did she treat like this?" Victoria felt like she was drowning. She stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, trying to think, trying to breathe. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grace standing on that stage, calm and dignified, while Victoria's world fell apart. A knock on the door startled her. Victoria. It was Daniel. She opened the door and found him standing there, already dressed in a suit, his phone in his hand. His expression was grim. "We need to talk," he said. Victoria followed him to his office, a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard. Daniel closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. She did, feeling like a child being called to the principal's office. Daniel sat across from her, his hands folded on the desk. "The board of Bradford Enterprises held an emergency meeting this morning," he said. Victoria's heart sank. "What?" "They're concerned about the PR fallout from last night. The video of Grace's speech has gone viral. It's all over the news. People are connecting the dots, and they're not happy. The board wants you to step down from your position on the foundation board." Victoria felt like she'd been slapped. "They can't do that. I founded that board. I built it from nothing." Daniel's expression didn't change. "They can, and they are, unless you resign voluntarily. They're going to vote you out. Either way, you're done." Victoria's hands trembled. "This is insane. I made one mistake. One." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes hard. "No, Victoria. You've made 1,000 mistakes. You've treated people like garbage for years. You've used your position to belittle and humiliate anyone you thought was beneath you. The only difference is at this time, It's public. This time, people are paying attention. And this time, there are consequences. Victoria stared at him, unable to speak. For the first time in her life, she had no defense, no excuse, no way out. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. What would happen to Victoria now? And would Grace finally find the peace she had been searching for? Don't miss the final chapter. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you're notified the moment next chapter drops. You won't believe how this ends. 3 weeks had passed since the gala, and Victoria Bradford's life had completely unraveled. She sat alone in her living room, staring at the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, but feeling none of its warmth. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel had moved into the guest house on their property, claiming he needed space to think. The staff had been reduced to a skeleton crew because Victoria couldn't stand the way they looked at her now, with pity and judgment in their eyes. Her phone, which used to buzz constantly with invitations and messages from friends, was now mostly silent. The few messages she did receive were from lawyers, publicists, and journalists still trying to get a statement. She had resigned from the foundation board, just as Daniel said she would have to. But that was only the beginning. 3 major donors had pulled their funding, citing concerns about the foundation's leadership and values. 2 board members had resigned in protest of Victoria's actions. The charity she had helped build was now scrambling to repair its reputation, and her name had become poison. Social media had been merciless. The video of Grace's speech had been viewed millions of times. People had dissected every word, every pause, every glance Grace had made toward the back of the room where Victoria had been standing. Think pieces had been written. Podcasts had discussed it. And Victoria had become the face of everything people hated about wealthy, privileged women who looked down on others. She had hired a crisis management firm, but even they had told her the same thing. Lay low, stay quiet, and hope that eventually people would forget. But Victoria knew they wouldn't forget. Not anytime soon. She heard the front door open and close. Daniel walked in, still wearing his suit from the office. He looked tired, older somehow, like the past few weeks had aged him years. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his voice flat and emotionless. Victoria looked up at him, already knowing what was coming. She had felt it in the distance between them, in the way he barely spoke to her anymore, in the way he looked at her like she was a stranger. "I want a divorce," Daniel said simply. No preamble, no sugarcoating, just the truth. Victoria felt something inside her crack, but she didn't cry. She had no tears left. "I figured," she said quietly. "I can't do this anymore, Victoria," Daniel continued, sitting down across from her. "I can't be married to someone who treats people the way you do. I've looked the other way for years. I've made excuses for you. I've told myself that you were just ambitious, just trying to protect what we built. But what you did to Grace, that wasn't ambition. That was cruelty. And I can't be a part of that anymore." Victoria nodded slowly. "So that's it? You're just going to throw away 20 years of marriage because I made one mistake." Daniel's expression hardened. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern I ignored because it was easier than dealing with it. But I can't ignore it anymore. And honestly, I don't want to. He stood up, adjusting his tie. "My lawyer will be in touch. You can keep the house. I'll take the place in Aspen. We'll split everything else fairly. I'm not trying to hurt you, Victoria. I just can't be with you anymore." And with that, he walked out, leaving Victoria alone in a house that suddenly felt far too big and far too empty. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace Williams sat in a small cafe in Hyde Park, sipping tea and looking out the window at the people walking by. Life had changed for her too, but in completely different ways. After the gala, her phone had started ringing again. Old friends reached out. Former colleagues invited her to lunch. Non-profits asked if she would consider joining their boards. Reporters wanted to interview her about her journey, her story, her unexpected return to public life. At first, Grace had been overwhelmed. She had spent so long in the quiet, invisible corners of the world that being seen again felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But slowly, she began to accept it. She began to remember who she had been before grief had swallowed her whole. She had started volunteering at a community center on the South Side, teaching financial literacy to young women who reminded her of herself at that age, hungry, ambitious, and full of dreams. She had also started speaking at events, sharing her story not as a victim, but as someone who had chosen to walk through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. She had not sought revenge against Victoria Bradford. She had not given interviews trashing the woman who had tried to humiliate her. In fact, when reporters asked about that night, Grace simply said, "Everyone deserves grace, even people who don't show to others." I hope she learns from this experience and becomes a better person because of it. It was a kind response, more kind than Victoria deserved. But Grace had learned long ago that holding on to anger only poisoned the person carrying it. She had let it go, and in doing so, she had set herself free. One afternoon, Grace received an unexpected visitor at the community center. She was in the middle of teaching a class when one of the staff members knocked on the door. "Grace, there's someone here to see you." Grace excused herself and walked to the front lobby. And there, standing nervously by the door, was Victoria Bradford. Grace stopped in her tracks, genuinely surprised. Victoria looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no designer labels in sight. Her face was free of makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen, like she had been crying. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Victoria took a shaky breath. "I know you probably don't want to see me," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I have no right to be here. But I needed to talk to you. I needed to say something." Grace crossed her arms, her expression guarded but calm. "I'm listening." Victoria's hands trembled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I invited you to that gala because I thought it would be funny. I thought I could make you feel small and insignificant, and it would make me feel powerful. But all it did was show me how small and insignificant I really am." Her voice broke, and tears started streaming down her face. "I've lost everything. My position on the board, my friends, my marriage, my reputation. And I deserve all of it. I know I do. But I couldn't move forward without telling you how sorry I am. You didn't deserve what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Grace watched her for a moment, seeing the brokenness in Victoria's eyes. She could have torn into her. She could have said all the things Victoria probably expected to hear. But instead, Grace took a deep breath and said something Victoria never expected. "I forgive you." Victoria looked up, shocked. "What?" "I forgive you," Grace repeated, her voice gentle but firm. "Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. But because holding on to anger and bitterness would only hurt me, not you. I've spent too many years carrying pain. I'm not going to carry yours too." Victoria broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Grace stepped forward and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a hand on Victoria's shoulder. "You made a mistake," Grace said quietly. "A big one. But mistakes don't have to define you. What you do next, how you choose to grow from this, that's what will define you." Victoria looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. "How do I even begin to fix this?" Grace gave her a sad smile. "You start by being kind. To everyone. Not just the people who can do something for you, but the people who can't. You start by seeing people, really seeing them. And you start by forgiving yourself, even though that's going to be the hardest part." Victoria nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being a better person than I ever was." Grace didn't respond. She simply watched as Victoria turned and walked out of the community center, her shoulders hunched, her steps slow and heavy. Grace knew Victoria had a long road ahead of her. She knew it would take years for Victoria to rebuild her life and her reputation. But she also knew that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. As for Grace, she returned to her class, to the young women waiting for her wisdom and guidance. She had spent 2 years scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans, searching for meaning in the quiet and invisible spaces of the world. And now, standing in front of these young women, teaching them how to build wealth and protect their futures, she realized she had found it. She had found peace. She had found purpose. And most importantly, she had found herself again. The cleaning lady who walked into that gala 3 weeks ago had been invisible, but the woman who walked out was unforgettable. And that made all the difference. The Yeni thank you so much for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought about Grace and Victoria's journey. What lesson did this story teach you? We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to check out our other powerful stories in the playlist. See you in the next one. Stay blessed.